Picture this. A man huddles under a bridge, shivering in the cold, needle marks dotting his arms. He's lost everything: his job, his family, his will to live. This is where our story begins, but it's far from where it ends. From the depths of addiction to a life of purpose and redemption, Amari's journey will challenge everything you thought you knew about second chances and the power of faith. Amari's fingers trace the edge of the framed photograph, his hand trembling slightly. The smiling faces of his wife and children stared back at him, a stark reminder of the life he once had. Just 6 months ago, he was the picture of success, a rising star at his marketing firm, with a beautiful family and a home in the suburbs. The American dream, wrapped up with a neat little bow. But that dream had unraveled with frightening speed. It started innocently enough, a colleague offering something to take the edge off during a particularly stressful project. Amari had always prided himself on his self-control, but the allure of instant relief proved too tempting. That first hit of heroin washed over him like a warm blanket, melting away his worries and leaving him floating in a haze of artificial bliss. He told himself it was a one-time thing, a moment of weakness he'd never repeat, but the cravings crept in, insidious and relentless. Soon, Amari found himself making excuses to slip away from his desk, ducking into alleyways with shaking hands and a racing heart. The high became his new normal, the only way he could face the mounting pressure at work and home. The decline was rapid and merciless. Missed deadlines piled up at the office, his once impeccable work now riddled with errors. Unexplained absences raised eyebrows among his colleagues. At home, he withdrew from his family, irritable and distant. The lies came easily at first: late nights at the office, a sudden bout of flu, but grew more elaborate and tangled with each passing day. Studies show that heroin addiction can take hold with startling speed. Within just 1 week of regular use, the brain begins to physically change, rewiring itself to crave the drug above all else. For Amari, that craving became an all-consuming obsession, eclipsing everything he once held dear. His wife's concerned glances turned to suspicious glares. His children's laughter, once a source of joy, now grated on his frayed nerves. As his work suffered and savings dwindled, the tension at home reached a breaking point. How much longer could he maintain this precarious balancing act before it all came crashing down? The answer would come on a Tuesday afternoon. Amari stumbled through the front door, still riding the vestiges of his latest high. The house was eerily quiet, devoid of the usual bustle of family life. A single sheet of paper rested on the kitchen table, his wife's neat handwriting stark against the white surface.
We can't watch you destroy yourself anymore. When you're ready to get help, call us. Until then, please don't try to contact us. I'm sorry, but I have to protect the kids.
The words blurred as tears welled in Amari's eyes. His trembling fingers crumpled the note, the finality of it all crashing over him like a tidal wave. In the space of a heartbeat, his entire world had shattered. The path Amari chose led him down a dark alley, where the flickering streetlight cast long shadows on his hunched form. What drives a man to trade everything he loves for a needle and a moment's escape? Amari's first night on the streets was a harsh awakening. The cold concrete beneath him seeped through his thin jacket, a stark contrast to the warm bed he'd taken for granted. The distant sound of sirens and shouting voices kept him on edge, his eyes darting nervously at every movement in the shadows. As dawn broke, Amari felt the familiar ache in his bones, the gnawing need that overshadowed everything else. He battled against the shame that threatened to consume him, trying to reconcile the successful man he once was with the desperate figure he'd become. But the cravings were relentless, drowning out reason and morality alike. The physical toll of addiction and homelessness quickly became apparent. Amari's once fit frame grew gaunt, his skin taking on a sickly pallor. Lack of proper nutrition and hygiene left him vulnerable to illness, and the constant stress of street life etched deep lines into his face. Sleep, when it came, was fitful and plagued by nightmares. Mentally, Amari found himself trapped in a vicious cycle. The guilt and self-loathing that followed each hit drove him deeper into despair, which in turn fueled his need for escape. He oscillated between moments of clarity, where he longed for his old life, and the foggy comfort of drug-induced numbness. The streets offered a grim education in survival. Amari learned to navigate the complex social hierarchy of the homeless community, to find safe places to sleep, and to scrounge for food and money. But with each passing day, his world shrank, narrowing to the singular focus of securing his next fix. The answer to how low Amari would sink came on a bitterly cold evening. He found himself outside a pawn shop, his wedding ring, the last tangible reminder of his former life, clutched tightly in his fist. He hesitated, memories of his wedding day flashing through his mind. But the pull of addiction was stronger than nostalgia. The transaction was quick and impersonal. The shopkeeper barely glanced at Amari as he pushed a handful of bills across the counter. Amari's fingers closed around the money, and with it, he felt something inside him break. He had crossed a line he never thought he would, trading the symbol of his love and commitment for a fleeting high. As Amari stumbled away from the pawn shop, the weight of his choices pressed down on him. He had lost his job, his family, his home, and now, the last piece of his old identity. But even in the depths of despair, fate had other plans for Amari. Unknown to him, a chance encounter was about to set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything he thought he knew about hope and redemption. As night fell and snow began to drift from the sky, Amari found himself facing the darkest moment of his life. He huddled beneath the concrete bridge, his thin jacket offering little protection against the biting cold. Snowflakes settled on his matted hair and beard as he stared blankly at the icy water flowing beneath him. The weight of his choices, the loss of everything he once held dear, pressed down on him like a physical force. Amari couldn't see a way forward. The thought of ending it all, of slipping into the frigid water and letting go, seemed like a release. He closed his eyes, feeling the pull of oblivion. A voice cut through the stillness.
"Hey there, friend. Looks like you could use this more than me."
A man stood nearby, holding out a thick blanket. His face was kind, lined with age, but his eyes held a warmth that pierced through Amari's despair. Amari hesitated, unsure how to respond. The stranger's simple act of kindness felt foreign after months of being ignored or scorned on the streets. He watched as the man gently draped the blanket over his shoulders.
"I know it might not seem like it right now, but you matter,"
the stranger said softly.
"Jesus hasn't forgotten you, even if it feels like the rest of the world has."
He reached into his bag, pulling out a sandwich and a small bottle of water.
"It's not much, but it's something to keep you going."
Amari's hands trembled as he accepted the offerings, a lump forming in his throat. The stranger's words about Jesus stirred something deep within him, a long-forgotten memory of faith and hope. For the first time in months, Amari felt a tiny spark ignite in his chest, a flicker of possibility. The man sat down beside Amari, respecting his space.
"There's a shelter not far from here,"
he said.
"Good people there. They might be able to help if you're ready."
He placed a small card with an address next to Amari. As the stranger stood to leave, Amari found his voice.
"Why?"
he croaked, barely audible. The man turned back, a gentle smile on his face.
"Because every life has value, my friend, even when we can't see it ourselves."
With that, the stranger disappeared into the snowy night, leaving Amari wrapped in the warmth of the blanket and the unexpected kindness. The seed of hope, long dormant, had been planted. Its growth would be slow and fraught with challenges, but it was there, waiting for the right conditions to flourish. Amari stood before the shelter, his hand trembling as he clutched the address card. The building loomed like a fortress, promising both hope and uncertainty. The familiar weight of addiction pressed down on him, a constant companion he both despised and clung to desperately. His heart pounded as he faced the threshold of possibility. Conflicting thoughts raced through his mind. The yearning for change battled against the whispers of doubt and fear. The prospect of judgment overwhelmed him. Would they see the person he used to be, or only the addict he had become? The barriers to seeking help were numerous and daunting. Shame, stigma, and the terrifying prospect of facing life without drugs kept many trapped in the cycle of addiction. Amari's internal struggle mirrored that of countless others who found themselves at this crossroads. As he hesitated, the memory of the stranger's kindness under the bridge lingered. That simple act of humanity had rekindled something in Amari, a tiny spark of hope he thought had been extinguished long ago. It reminded him that perhaps he wasn't beyond redemption after all. Amari's hand hovered inches from the door handle. He could feel the pull of the streets behind him, the siren call of oblivion that promised temporary relief. It would be so easy to turn around, to lose himself once more in the familiar haze. With a deep breath that seemed to draw from the very core of his being, Amari wrapped his fingers around the handle and pulled. The door swung open, revealing a world he had both longed for and dreaded. As he stepped across the threshold, leaving the cold uncertainty of the streets behind, Amari couldn't have known that this single step would set off a chain reaction in his life, leading him down a path of recovery, redemption, and unexpected purpose. The shelter's common room hummed with quiet conversation, a stark contrast to the harsh world outside. Amari sank into a plastic chair, his body tense and eyes darting nervously around the room. The smell of coffee and disinfectant hung in the air, mingling with the unmistakable scent of too many bodies in too small a space. A hush fell over the crowd as a man stepped onto the small platform at the front. He was unremarkable in appearance, middle-aged with graying hair and kind eyes that seemed to take in everyone at once. When he spoke, his voice was gentle yet firm, carrying easily to the furthest corners of the room.
"I see you.
He began, his gaze sweeping across the sea of faces.
I see your pain, your struggles, your doubts. But I also see your strength, your resilience, and the spark of hope that brought you here today."
Amari shifted uncomfortably, feeling exposed despite being just one face in the crowd. The speaker's words seemed to cut through the fog of apathy that had enveloped him for so long. As the message unfolded, Amari found himself leaning forward, drawn in by the speaker's raw honesty. The man shared his own story of addiction and redemption, of hitting rock bottom and finding a lifeline in faith. It wasn't preachy or judgmental, but rather an invitation to believe in the possibility of change. The atmosphere in the room shifted palpably. Sniffles could be heard from various corners, and several people nodded along, their eyes shining with unshed tears. Amari was surprised to feel a lump forming in his own throat, emotions he'd long suppressed bubbling to the surface. The speaker touched on the role of spirituality in recovery, not as a magic cure-all, but as a source of strength and purpose. He spoke of finding meaning beyond the next fix, of reconnecting with one's true self and with a higher power, whatever that might mean to each individual. As the talk progressed, Amari felt a curious mix of emotions washing over him. There was fear of change, of facing his demons without the numbing embrace of heroin. But there was also a growing sense of possibility, a tiny flame of hope flickering to life in his chest. The speaker's final words rang out, clear and powerful.
Your past does not define you. Every day, every moment is a chance to choose a different path. You are worthy of love, of healing, of a life beyond addiction. The journey won't be easy, but you don't have to walk it alone.
In that moment, something shifted within Amari. He felt a surge of hope, an emotion he hadn't experienced in years. As he looked around at the faces of those who, like him, were seeking a way out of the darkness, he felt a sense of connection he'd long forgotten. The journey to recovery would be daunting, but perhaps he wouldn't have to face it alone. Amari gripped the edge of the thin mattress, his knuckles white with effort. The small room in the rehab facility felt suffocating, the stark walls a canvas for his inner turmoil. Every fiber of his being yearned for the familiar escape of heroin, a craving that had dominated his life for far too long. The first days of detox were a brutal assault on his body and mind. Nausea, cold sweats, and fever chills racked his frame, leaving him weak and disoriented. But it was the bone-deep ache that truly tested his resolve, a pain so intense it made him want to tear at his own skin. As the hours crawled by, Amari's thoughts became a relentless parade of memories and regrets. his wife's face, his children's laughter, once cherished sounds that now seemed to belong to another lifetime. The weight of his losses pressed down on him, threatening to crush his spirit in this sterile room that felt more like a prison than a place of healing. Nurses moved in and out with quiet efficiency, their encouragement barely penetrating the fog of his withdrawal. One older woman with kind eyes paused by his bedside, her words a lifeline in the storm.
"You're doing great, Amari.
She said softly.
I know it doesn't feel like it, but you're stronger than this addiction. Just take it 1 minute at a time."
As the days blurred together, Amari found himself experiencing emotions he'd long kept buried: anger, grief, and underneath it all, a tiny spark of hope that refused to be extinguished. By the 5th day, a shift began. The physical symptoms eased, replaced by exhaustion. Amari managed to keep down small amounts of food, each bite a hard-won victory. The cravings persisted, but they no longer held the same overwhelming power. On the 7th day, Amari stood on shaky legs, examining his reflection. The face that stared back was gaunt and pale, but his eyes held something new, a glimmer of clarity and determination. As he made his way to group therapy, Amari felt a mix of apprehension and resolve. He'd reached a milestone that had seemed impossible just days ago. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but for the first time in years, he felt ready to face it. Each day would bring new challenges, but also new reasons to keep fighting, and Amari was finally prepared for the battle ahead. Amari's finger hovered over his ex-wife's number, his heart racing as he stared at the familiar digits on the screen. Memories flooded his mind. Happy times with his family, followed by the painful descent into addiction that had torn them apart. Taking a deep breath, he pressed the call button before he could lose his nerve. The ringing seemed to stretch on forever until a voice answered, cautious, guarded, but unmistakably Sarah's.
Hello?
Amari's voice caught in his throat, the silence stretching between them, heavy with unspoken emotions.
Amari? Is that you?
Sarah's tone shifted, a mix of concern and wariness coloring her words.
Yeah, it's me.
Amari finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper.
I'm sorry for calling out of the blue. I needed to talk to you.
Are you okay?
Sarah asked, her voice softening slightly.
The kids. We've been worried.
Amari's eyes stung with unshed tears.
I'm getting help,
he said.
I've been clean for a month now.
The silence that followed felt endless. Amari could almost hear the gears turning in Sarah's mind, weighing his words against the pain of the past.
That's good, Amari.
She finally said, her voice a mix of emotions he couldn't quite decipher.
I'm glad you're getting help.
As they talked, Sarah listened to his apology, not excusing his actions, but allowing him to take responsibility. She shared how his addiction had affected their family, her words painful but necessary for Amari to hear. By the end of the call, no grand promises had been made, but a small crack of possibility had opened, where before there had been only a wall of pain and resentment.
Take care of yourself, Amari.
Sarah said as they prepared to end the call.
And keep in touch, okay? Let us know how you're doing.
As Amari hung up, he felt a complex mix of emotions washing over him. The conversation hadn't been easy, but it was a crucial first step. The path to healing his relationships would be long, but it had begun. The shelter's common room buzzed with nervous energy as Amari stood before the small gathering of residents. His palms were slick with sweat, and he could feel his heart pounding against his ribcage. This was his first time volunteering at the shelter that had helped him turn his life around, and the weight of responsibility settled heavily on his shoulders. Amari cleared his throat, his eyes scanning the faces before him. Some looked expectant, others skeptical, and a few seemed lost in their own thoughts. He recognized that look. He'd worn it himself not so long ago.
My name is Amari.
He began, his voice wavering slightly.
And 6 months ago, I was sitting where you are now.
He paused, letting the words sink in.
I was broken, hopeless, and convinced that my life was over. But I was wrong.
As Amari delved into his story, he felt a strange mix of vulnerability and strength. He spoke of his descent into addiction, the loss of his family, and the long, dark nights on the streets. His voice grew stronger as he described his journey to recovery, the daily battles, and the small victories that had led him to this moment.
It's not easy,
Amari admitted, his eyes meeting those of a young woman in the front row.
There were days I wanted to give up, to run back to the familiar comfort of numbness. But every time I pushed through, I found a little more of myself.
He talked about the role of purpose in maintaining sobriety, how helping others had become a lifeline in his recovery.
When I started volunteering, something changed,
Amari explained.
For the first time in years, I felt like I had something to offer, like my struggles could mean something if they helped someone else find hope.
As Amari spoke, he noticed a shift in the room. The skeptical looks began to soften, and a few heads nodded in understanding. An older man in the back wiped at his eyes, and Amari felt a lump form in his own throat.
I'm not here to tell you it's going to be easy,
Amari continued, his voice thick with emotion.
but I am here to tell you it's possible. You are stronger than you know, and your life has value, even if you can't see it right now.
When Amari finished speaking, the room fell silent for a moment. Then slowly, a smattering of applause broke out. The young woman in the front row stood up, her eyes shining with unshed tears.
How did you do it?
She asked, her voice barely above a whisper.
How did you keep going when everything felt hopeless?
Amari smiled gently.
One day at a time,
He replied.
and by remembering that every step forward, no matter how small, is a victory.
As the session wrapped up, several residents approached Amari to share their own stories or ask questions. The connections formed in that room were tangible, a web of shared experiences and newfound hope. Speaking with the last of the residents, Amari felt a sense of clarity wash over him. This, helping others find their way out of the darkness, was his calling, a purpose that gave meaning to all the pain he had endured. As he left the shelter that day, Amari knew he had found a future full of promise and the chance to make a real difference in the world. Amari stood before the mirrored wall of the elevator, adjusting his borrowed suit. The reflection showed a man transformed, eyes clear and focused, a stark contrast to his recent past. As the elevator doors opened, he stepped into a bustling office, the familiar sounds of a corporate environment washing over him.
Mr. Thompson will be with you shortly,
The receptionist said with a polite smile. Amari sat, his mind replaying the years lost to addiction. The door opened, and a middle-aged man with kind eyes emerged.
Amari, I'm David Thompson. Please come in.
The interview began with standard questions about Amari's experience and skills. He spoke confidently of past successes, his voice growing stronger as he recounted impressive campaigns. Then came the inevitable question.
And what have you been doing these past few years?
Amari took a deep breath.
Mr. Thompson, I want to be completely honest. I struggled with addiction, which cost me everything. But I've been in recovery for 6 months and I'm committed to rebuilding my life and career.
The silence felt endless. Finally, Mr. Thompson spoke.
Thank you for your honesty, Amari. That couldn't have been easy to share.
What followed was a thoughtful conversation about Amari's recovery journey, the skills he'd developed, and his plans for maintaining sobriety while managing work stress. As the interview concluded, Mr. Thompson leaned back.
Amari, I appreciate your candor. Many companies might see your history as a liability, but I see potential. Your journey shows resilience and determination, qualities we value here. We have a 3-month probationary period for all new hires. If you're willing to start there, with some additional check-ins, I'd like to offer you a position on our team.
Emotion welled up in Amari as the opportunity sank in. This was a chance to reclaim his life, to prove his past didn't define his future.
Mr. Thompson, I would be honored to accept. Thank you for taking a chance on me.
As Amari left the office, his steps felt lighter. The path ahead would be challenging, but with this opportunity, he had taken another crucial step towards rebuilding the life he'd thought was lost forever. Amari stood before the weathered door of his small apartment, the weight of the key in his hand feeling monumental. His heart raced with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. This moment represented more than just entering a new living space. It was a threshold between his past life of homelessness and addiction and the promise of a stable future. As he stepped inside, Amari's eyes took in every detail of the modest studio apartment. The space was small, but to him, it might as well have been a palace. Sunlight streamed through a single window, casting a warm glow on the bare walls. The room held only the essentials: a bed, a small table with chairs, and a kitchenette in the corner. Amari moved through the space, his mind struggling to process the reality of having a place to call his own again. The silence felt almost oppressive after months of constant noise from shelters and streets. He found himself straining to hear the familiar sounds of other people, the background hum that had become his constant companion. Sitting on the edge of the bed, a wave of emotion washed over him. Tears pricked at his eyes as the full weight of this moment hit him. This apartment represented more than just shelter. It was a tangible reminder of how far he had come since those dark days under the bridge. Amari reached for his backpack, pulling out a framed photograph he had carried with him throughout his journey. The smiling faces of his family stared back at him, a snapshot of happier times that had once been too painful to look at. Now, as he placed the frame on the bedside table, it felt like a beacon of hope, a goal to work towards. The room seemed to breathe with possibility. Each bare wall was a canvas for new memories, each empty space an opportunity to rebuild his life. Yet, anxiety gnawed at the edges of Amari's mind. Could he really live independently again? Manage the responsibilities of rent, bills, and daily life while staying committed to his recovery? Amari stood by the window, looking out at the bustling street below. He thought about the long road that had led him here, the pain, the struggle, the small victories that had accumulated into this moment. This apartment was a foundation upon which he could rebuild his life, one day at a time. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the room, Amari felt a sense of peace settle over him. This small space represented more than just shelter. It was a fresh start, a chance to rewrite his story. And for the first time in years, Amari felt truly ready to begin that new chapter. Amari's heart raced as he scanned the park, searching for familiar faces among the bustling playground. The cool metal of the bench pressed against his palms, a stark reminder of how real this moment was. Months of therapy and preparation had led to this supervised visit with his children, yet nothing could fully ready him for the flood of emotions washing over him. A social worker approached, two small figures trailing behind her. Amari's breath caught in his throat as he recognized his daughter's bouncing curls and his son's determined stride. They looked older, taller, a painful reminder of the time he'd lost to addiction.
Remember,
the social worker said gently.
Take it slow. They may need time to adjust.
Amari nodded, his mouth dry as the children drew closer. Their eyes met his, a mix of curiosity and apprehension evident in their expressions. He wanted nothing more than to sweep them into his arms, but he knew better than to rush.
Hi, Emma. Hi, Tyler.
He said, his voice barely above a whisper.
It's really good to see you.
Emma, always the more outgoing of the two, spoke first.
Hi, Dad.
The word Dad sent a jolt through Amari's chest, a title he'd feared he might never hear again. Tyler hung back, his small hand clutching his sister's. Amari recognized the wariness in his son's eyes, a look that mirrored his own inner turmoil. How could he bridge the chasm his addiction had created? The first few minutes stretched on, filled with awkward small talk and long pauses. Amari asked about school, their hobbies, careful to avoid any topics that might stir up painful memories. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tension began to ease. Emma's eyes lit up as she described her latest art project, and Amari found himself leaning in, genuinely fascinated by her creativity. Tyler, still quiet, seemed to relax as he listened to his sister, occasionally adding a detail she'd forgotten. As they talked, Amari couldn't help but notice the little changes in his children. Emma's missing front tooth, the way Tyler's hair curled at the nape of his neck, details he'd missed during his absence that now felt monumental. The social worker had advised Amari to be honest about his recovery without burdening the children with too many details. When Emma hesitantly asked where he'd been, Amari took a deep breath.
I was sick for a while,
He said carefully.
but I've been working really hard to get better. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you, but I want you to know that I love you both very much.
Tyler's eyes met his, a flicker of understanding passing between them.
Are you better now?
He asked, his voice small but steady. Amari felt a lump form in his throat.
I'm getting better every day,
He replied.
and being here with you helps more than you know.
As their time drew to a close, Amari felt a mix of sadness and hope. This visit was just the beginning of a long journey to rebuild trust and repair their relationship. But as Emma gave him a tentative hug goodbye, and Tyler offered a small wave, Amari knew that every small step forward was a victory in rebuilding his family. Amari knelt in the dimly lit chapel, tears streaming down his face as he grappled with the weight of his past and the hope for his future. The wooden pew creaked beneath him, a stark reminder of the physical world, even as he sought connection with something greater. His hands, once trembling with the need for a fix, now clasped tightly in prayer. The silence of the chapel enveloped him, broken only by his quiet sobs and the distant hum of traffic outside. Memories flooded his mind. The pain he'd caused his family, the strangers he'd wronged, the opportunities squandered. The burden of guilt pressed down on him, threatening to crush his newfound sobriety.
God,
He whispered.
I don't know if I deserve forgiveness, but I need it. I need to forgive myself.
As he spoke, Amari felt a shift within himself. The tightness in his chest began to loosen, replaced by a warmth that spread through his body. He thought of his children's faces during their recent visit, the tentative hope in their eyes. He remembered the kindness of strangers who had believed in him when he couldn't believe in himself. Amari's words became more confident as he continued to pray. He asked for strength to face each day, for guidance in rebuilding his relationships, for the courage to make amends where possible. A sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years washed over him. As Amari rose from his knees, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The path ahead was still uncertain, filled with potential pitfalls and temptations, but he no longer felt alone in his journey. This connection to something greater offered a lifeline, a source of strength he could draw upon in his darkest moments. Leaving the chapel with steady steps, his eyes clear and focused, Amari saw the world outside differently. It seemed brighter somehow, full of possibilities he hadn't allowed himself to see before. He knew the road to recovery would still be challenging, but he felt equipped to face it head-on. This deepening spiritual connection became Amari's anchor in recovery, a constant reminder that redemption was possible, that every day offered a new chance to live with purpose and integrity. Amari sat across from Sarah in the cafe, the weight of their shared history palpable between them. Sarah looked different, older, wearier, but with a glimmer of something in her eyes he couldn't quite place.
Thank you for meeting me,
Amari said softly. Sarah nodded, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken words.
How are you, Amari? Really?
Sarah asked, her question loaded with meaning. Amari took a deep breath.
I'm better. I've been clean for 8 months now. It's been challenging, but I'm committed to my recovery and making amends for the pain I've caused.
Sarah's expression softened slightly, but wariness remained.
I'm glad you're getting help, Amari. But rebuilding what we lost will take more than words.
I understand.
Amari replied, feeling the full weight of his past actions.
I'm not asking for forgiveness yet. I just want a chance to show you that I've changed.
As they talked, the enormity of the damage Amari's addiction had wrought became clear. Sarah spoke of sleepless nights, explaining to their children why Daddy wasn't coming home and the trust that had crumbled with each broken promise. Amari listened, his heart aching. He shared his own journey, hitting rock bottom, the grueling process of detox and therapy, and his daily struggle to stay clean. With each word, a small piece of the wall between them began to crumble.
Where do we go from here, Amari?
Sarah asked, her voice a mixture of caution and something that sounded almost like hope.
I'd like to be part of your lives again, yours and the kids, but I understand if that's too much right now. Maybe we could start small, regular check-ins, supervised visits with the children.
Sarah considered his words, then nodded slowly.
We can try that. But Amari, one slip, one broken promise, and that's it. I can't put the kids through that again.
Amari felt a surge of determination.
I understand. Thank you, Sarah. I'll do whatever it takes to earn back your trust.
As they stood to leave, the tension between them had eased, replaced by cautious optimism. The road to forgiveness stretched out before them, long and uncertain. But with each step, each honest conversation, they moved closer to healing the wounds of the past and building a new future, together or apart. What happens when the rescued becomes the rescuer? Amari was about to find out as he embarked on a mission that would challenge everything he thought he knew about his own redemption. The night air bit at Amari's skin as he walked the familiar streets, his arms laden with blankets and care packages. Each step brought a flood of memories, but tonight, he wasn't here to succumb to old demons. He was here to fight them. Amari's eyes scanned the shadows, searching for the huddled forms he knew all too well. His heart clenched when he spotted a man curled up in a doorway, shaking with cold or withdrawal. Perhaps both. Approaching slowly, Amari knelt beside him.
Hey there,
He said softly, holding out a blanket.
thought you could use this.
The man looked up, his eyes wary and haunted. Amari felt a wave of emotion threaten to overwhelm him, but he forced himself to stay present.
I've been where you are.
Amari continued, his voice steady.
It feels like there's no way out, like God's forgotten about you. But I promise you, He hasn't.
The man's gaze sharpened, a flicker of interest cutting through the haze of hopelessness.
How do you know?
He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Amari settled himself on the cold concrete.
Because He found me in my darkest hour.
He replied.
When I thought I was beyond saving, He sent someone to remind me that I mattered. And now, I'm here to tell you the same thing.
As Amari shared his story, he felt something shift inside him. He spoke of the stranger who had shown him kindness, of the shelter that had given him a chance, of the faith that had sustained him through recovery. The man listened, his body gradually relaxing. When Amari finished, there was a moment of silence, heavy with possibility.
Do you really think there's hope for someone like me?
The man asked, his voice thick with emotion. Amari reached out, gently squeezing the man's shoulder.
I know there is,
He said firmly.
because if there was hope for me, there's hope for anyone. God's love doesn't discriminate. He's waiting for you to take that first step.
As Amari stood to leave, he felt lighter than he had in years. The streets now felt like a battleground where he could make a difference. In reaching out to others, he had found a way to make peace with his past, transforming his pain into purpose. Amari walked on, his heart full. He knew the road ahead would be challenging, but he was no longer afraid. With each person he helped, each story he shared, he was rewriting his own narrative as a beacon of hope in the darkness. The community center hummed with anticipation as Amari stood before the crowd, his hands trembling slightly. Familiar faces filled the room, fellow recovering addicts, counselors, and loved ones who had supported him through his turbulent journey. The sobriety chip in his pocket felt both weightless and impossibly heavy.
1 year ago, I didn't think I'd be alive today.
Amari began, his voice thick with emotion.
But God had other plans for me.
The room fell silent, absorbing his words. Amari's mind flashed to the challenges he'd faced. Agonizing withdrawals, nightmares, and the constant battle against cravings. Yet here he stood, a testament to perseverance and faith.
This chip
Amari continued, holding up the small token.
represents every prayer answered, every temptation resisted, every moment I chose life over addiction.
He paused, scanning the crowd. His sponsor, Mike, nodded encouragingly. Sarah, his ex-wife, sat with their children, offering a cautious smile. Their presence filled Amari with a profound warmth.
I didn't do this alone.
Amari said, his voice growing stronger.
God placed each of you in my life for a reason. You believed in me when I couldn't. You showed me that recovery is about rebuilding a life worth living.
Amari outlined his plans, continuing his education, becoming a certified addiction counselor, being a better father. Each goal felt both daunting and exhilarating, a roadmap to a future once thought impossible. As applause filled the room, Amari felt a sense of peace wash over him. He knew challenges lay ahead, but he had the strength within him and the support around him to face whatever came next. Amari closed his eyes, offering a silent prayer of gratitude. This milestone marked the beginning of a lifelong journey, and for the first time in years, he felt truly ready to embrace the future. Amari pinned the name tag to his crisp white shirt, the words, Amari, Addiction Counselor Trainee, a testament to his journey. He made his way to the orientation room, where a diverse group of trainees sat in a circle. As the lead counselor began the session, Amari's mind flashed to nights spent under bridges and the desperate acts of his past. During the orientation, Amari shared his story, speaking of the stranger who'd offered him a blanket on a cold night, igniting his path to recovery. His fellow trainees listened with empathy and admiration. The lead counselor presented statistics on recovered addicts working as counselors, highlighting promising results in client engagement and retention. However, she also emphasized the challenges, including the risk of triggering one's own trauma. Amari contemplated how his experiences would shape his approach. Would his empathy blur professional boundaries, or would his memories make him overly cautious? As his training progressed, Amari faced his first real test. A young man in withdrawal was brought into the clinic, eyes wild with fear. Drawing on his training and personal experience, Amari spoke softly, sharing snippets of his own journey. Slowly, the man's breathing steadied, his clenched fists relaxing. Guiding the man through intake, Amari felt a profound sense of purpose. He realized that in helping others, he had found meaning in his struggles. Each painful memory and hard-won victory had become a tool to light the way for those still lost in addiction's darkness. Amari's journey from the depths of addiction to a life of purpose serves as a powerful reminder that even in our darkest moments, hope and redemption are possible. His story began with a simple act of kindness, a stranger offering a blanket and words of encouragement on a cold night. That small gesture sparked a transformation that would ripple outward, touching countless lives. Through faith, perseverance, and the support of others, Amari rebuilt his life from the ground up. He faced his demons, mended broken relationships, and found a new calling in helping others battling addiction. While his faith played a crucial role, it was Amari's own determination and hard work that ultimately led to his recovery. Amari's tale reminds us that rock bottom can become a foundation for rebuilding, that second chances are possible, and that every life has inherent value and potential for change. His journey from homeless addict to respected counselor and advocate demonstrates the profound impact one person's transformation can have on an entire community.